Okay, so let's also talk about AEToken, some of the work there. So I have pulled up here, AEToken safeguards and increases all your affiliate revenue and deals in one place. Okay.
Yeah, so first of all, I think every ICO comes with skepticism these days. And I have a lot of the same skepticism. And it's one of the reasons I like this project, is it's solving a couple of very real problems. So you may have heard of Basic Attention Token, Brave, and the attempt to kind of go after the advertising industry to make it so that the viewers cut in and the ad fraud falls and all those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Well, there's also a primary traffic driving way called affiliate marketing. And around the globe, different industries use it differently. Like here in the US, Amazon still has a very significant affiliate program. But there are a lot of jurisdictions where what the affiliates drive traffic to, things like online casinos, completely legal, completely legitimate, Americans hate it. And it's a very big business. Now it's weird because it's so patchwork, you haven't had kind of these monoliths. There's no Facebook of this market, right? But you've got a lot of these kind of medium to small businesses, like 10 guys driving traffic to an e-commerce site in Germany, and they're making enough money to easily afford to run the business, but it doesn't really scale beyond that. But they run into two huge problems. Problem number one is that most of these guys get paid out in Skrill, which is kind of global PayPal. And so all of the nasty things you ever heard about PayPal apply in force. So there's extremely expensive currency exchange rates. You can only take out so much per day. One of my friends in this world bought a Mercedes, and he had to convince the Mercedes dealer that he could only pay him about 1/21th for the next 21 days to buy it in cash. Right. So their accounts get frozen. Things go well, and that means you can't access your money. Really horribly painful, and obviously one of those things that a cryptocurrency has a lot of value for. Plus, there's also a real kind of pyramid of division. So you'll have a site, and you'll have a super affiliate, and you'll have a bunch of sub affiliates. Yep. And so you can have people who are owed like a nickel. And in the past, it's not worth paying somebody a nickel because there's absolutely no way from a fees perspective that makes sense. So like people would have their balances sit for months until they added up to something that was worth transferring. Well, the divisibility of cryptocurrency obviously is very relevant to that problem. All of a sudden now it's like, here's a tenth of a cent, you're paid up, right? And then the other issue is that these are very international businesses. So you'll have a Cayman corporation striking a deal with a Malta corporation, and if one of the sides welches in the deal, well, the reality is there's no way to sue each other because you can sue in Cayman, get it exported to Malta. I mean, it's a very, very large contract that even makes it worth suing in the first place. So we're enabling preloaded arbitration with mediators. So that normally transaction goes through, mediator gets an extremely tiny fee just for having been there and been available. But if you actually have a problem, now there's recourse, and you've got coins out there locked, waiting for this resolution of your dispute. So all of a sudden, both sides are actually forced to play fair, and we think that's actually going to increase the size of the affiliate market.
And I like how you were describing sort of this. Well, this is definitely applicable to content creators, totally. Rather than having someone else sell the advertisements to your space and et cetera, you can bring in people that have your same values. You can then advertise on their behalf. You can then get maybe a more fair play between the two.
Well, in the past, I think folks like yourself even, right now you kind of got to use a third-party service, and that service takes its hunk, and it's not necessarily as easily managed. Making this become something that smaller, individual YouTubers or others can use directly and build their own programs. And now it's just a software problem, and all of the back office problems of paying people out and all that is now pushed away because you use this kind of currency. And instead of just using Bitcoin straight up, you're going to have lower fees. You're going to have hopefully less volatility because you actually have a functioning market where like affiliate websites are buying it to then pay it to their affiliates who are then spending it for paying the rent.
Mm-hmm. And so how long has AEToken been around?
About 7-8 months. We're currently about to do a non-US offering out of Malta. So Malta's become one of the very leading European, especially domiciles for either utility tokens or security tokens.
And why Malta?
Again, I think it's that regulatory lead.
Regulatory lead, and why are they ahead in terms of regulation?
They've been very open to understanding this. It's one of those situations where they've classically been a business-friendly haven, And they saw the kind of rise of ICOs and said, okay, let's start putting together some of the best practices. Let's adopt what I'd call a light framework, not dissimilar to what the SEC is doing here in the US. And that way you have a lot more regulatory certainty to be able to say to people, yep, there is a EU, EC country that this business is domiciled in. These are your investor protections there. There's actually a regulatory environment instead of it just being the Wild West.
The perfection is the enemy of execution or getting shit done. And so if you're constantly waiting to build out the best possible framework of regulation, you'll never actually build one out. It'll take you too long. And so it's almost like they started with this toddler phase of a framework, and then that's enabling people to come in, and then they're going to upgrade it over time.
Well, it's somewhat like Delaware courts, right? Like and a lot of people don't kind of know this, but like the Delaware courts have optimized themselves for businesses. So you can get rulings from the Delaware courts in like a week.
Yeah.
These are the things that don't work, but it's all about business. And so Malta, both legislatively and judicially, has kind of done this. They've said, look, we want to be experts. We're going to start here. As individual projects have issues, bring them to us and we'll modify the legislation moving forward. Right? It's that kind of responsiveness and that true engagement that becomes very interesting, because it's like there are certainly good things that came out of old securities regulations, right? Pump and dumps are always pump and dumps. The world does not change completely. But then there's a whole bunch of stuff that just is not relevant anymore, because things like, does your security exist? Well, you can go look on the blockchain and see that it does, right? So there's a whole host of differences that are relatively poor fits. And so having these regions that are willing to look at that and go, okay, we're going to bring the general investor protections, but then we're going to look at those and make sure they actually fit for what's going on.
And be small enough to be able to actually...
light enough that a small team who's trying to raise a small amount of money can go do them.
5 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you for that heads up. So, okay, so I'm looking this up here that, we're looking it up here that Malta is in the central Mediterranean between Sicily and the North African coast. Do we know what the population is? I'm going to look.
It's pretty small. It's not, it's not dissimilar like a Cayman or various. It's also somewhat of a
with a population of under 500,000. Yeah. So they're really able to just pivot and,
Yep. But Euro banking, you've got access to the European banking system.
Yeah, that's also very cool.
That's right.
Yep. Because are they part of the EU?
They are.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, they're right there, just south of Sicily. That's so interesting. Less than 500,000 people in there. So where are the other kind of hubs? We had some in the Caribbean as well, right?
So actually on the crypto side, I'd say more like Switzerland. And Singapore have both been looking at this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of business in Hong Kong, whether that's, shall we say, well understood or not. That's a major hub. Both Japan and Korea have tremendous cryptocurrency markets as well. But for the more regulatory side of it, it's tended to be Switzerland, Singapore, Malta, as we said.
Cool. That's really important to know, is that like which places are able to lead.
Well, look, I laughingly, Switzerland's gotten expensive, and I also worry a little bit that like what we're trying to do is put banks out of business, and what Switzerland does is bank.
Yeah. Dang. So there was actually $6.8 billion in revenue generated by the affiliate industry in 2017.
That's right. And that's
huge.
Just like US and the UK, right? So there's
way
bigger numbers
more
out there.
Yeah, especially China and
Yep. And again, it's been difficult to manage these systems. So, making the painful parts of those systems go away makes it a far less painful project to run.
Yeah. AEToken is very exciting as well.
Yeah, cool. Anywhere where there's like a two-sided market and it's not 80-20, you've usually got these power laws going on in these businesses. When there's a broad open market, and this is where like the Uber model goes, right? You got a bunch of drivers, you got a bunch of riders, there's no kind of dominant entity. That happens in the middle market here in the token world, almost all the way to the tail. Yeah. Those are the kinds of economies where tokenization really makes some sense, and where you may not just want to use Bitcoin or Chia directly because you need some extra features that aren't ready yet or aren't there yet on some of the other chains.
Awesome. I think there's a couple things that I think we should talk about. Let's. I'll flip over this This 15-minute timer. So that's at 35 now, right?
38.
38, perfect, thank you. Thanks, Eddie. So let's ask you a couple thoughts. I guess the first thought that I want to ask you is, this is kind of a funny thought, but who do you think Satoshi is?
So I'm pretty confident Hal Finney is part of Satoshi.
What is?
Hal Finney.
Hal Finney.
Yeah, so Hal Finney is already well established as being the guy who Satoshi first started talking to.
Yeah.
And obviously Nick Szabo comes up as being part of it. It certainly wasn't just Hal, right? So I do think there was more than just Hal. But Hal and some other folks that are kind of old cypherpunks, this is their MO. In fact, just after Hal's death, Phil Zimmerman at PGP admitted that it was Hal who'd exported PGP and was supposedly would have been the target of the investigation, but Phil stepped in and took the public face of it intentionally. And so this is exactly Hal's MO. Plus, as Bram has been digging into the code, there are a lot of signatures of how Hal coded, and they are very much in the original release from Satoshi.
Interesting. I had also heard things like that a machine programmed.
Look, the whole AI comes back from the future is always interesting. But the funny thing about that is, excluding that it's all an AI. Stepping that aside. At that moment in time, there were like 4 or 5 different researchers that had all the pieces. So, the state of the art was there on the table, just nobody had pulled it together. And that's often one of the hardest problems, but it's partially why it doesn't feel like it was airdropped in by aliens, if you know what I'm trying to say. It was someone who, like Hal is often credited for being one of the predecessors with Hashcash, right? And it was taking that and some other things he was reading and pulling it together and really figuring out that like grinding was actually a security feature. I mean, these are weird thoughts, right? But like a lot of internet things, the hacked version is actually the best version.
This is kind of, we've talked about this before as being in a couple decades ago, the internet, all these new applications have been built on the internet. Now this is kind of this new blockchain infrastructure. All these new applications are being built on the blockchain infrastructure. We both know that a lot of them are going to die. And that
Cambrian explosion, then boom.
Cambrian explosion, right. yeah, exactly, and then boom. So what do you think are the main principles or characteristics that have to be at the core of these organizations in order for them to live?
So I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think you've got to be in these multi-sided markets, right? Because one of the things that, the real use of a blockchain is when there's not a lot of trust. It's a way to build trust in a trustless manner, right? So any place where there is those kinds of agency problems, somebody doesn't trust the other side, but you need to coordinate, very, very strong application. The more moving of money is core to what you're trying to do, and the fungibility of that and the ease of that, right? That's again where a blockchain or a side chain starts to really matter, right? I think there's a little stretch right now to try to build some applications directly against the blockchain. I actually think the applications are going to be more interesting up on like Lightning Network and these kind of next layer up technologies where, down below the Chia blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain are hyper secure, a lot more conservative about changes. If you're buying a house, you're doing it on the blockchain. If you're buying coffee, you're doing it on Lightning. Right. And it's the way the world currently works. There's a reserve infrastructure, like remember the gold in 9/11 that they had to remove. I mean, that's the underlying banking infrastructure, right? In fact, like the French in the '60s, when the dollar was unpegged from gold, tried to grab their gold back by bringing a destroyer to New York Harbor. Like they wanted it loaded, right? We don't move the gold much, right? But layer up, you've got SWIFT, which is actually like a private internet. That's not actually what people kind of think it is, but SWIFT is the way the banks talk. And then you've got LIBOR, there's the bank window about how they loan each other, and you've got the Fed, and so you got all these things that then kind of bubble up to debit cards and ACH and then PayPal. Well, we're going to have to do the exact same sorts of layering. I think the layers are going to be a lot thinner. Maybe 3 layers. The thing you use to that your computer uses to talk to another computer and make sure that you're real, and you exchange 2 cents and you don't know about it in the background, and you keep your account loaded with $20, and when you look in it, there's $18 sometimes, and there's $21 other times, right?
So on Lightning, and just a quick question on here, how would we then ensure? Because with a card right now, I'm sure 100% of transactions are going through.
So Lightning uses both kind of time and the main blockchain. So the idea is that you'll build a channel. So you and I will connect, and I will put some money in, and I'll pay you $1. Well, that channel stays open. As you talk to other people, you now know how to reach me, and you can see that I've got more money. And so if I want to pay him, I can pass it through you. Now, if one of us cheats, we can kind of take it from a timestamp where that cheat happened, stop, and roll it all the way back.
Yeah.
And that way, it's enforced by the security of the underlying blockchain.
And so it's constantly being analyzed to make sure that there's not
That's right.
cheat, and if it is, then you go back to where it was.
Your iPhone or your Android is literally going to watch your channels to make sure
All
the
the
transactions
time.
are legit. That's
Legit
right.
all the time, and it'll stop it if it's not being
Right.
legit.
It'll roll it back,
That's
and all
so
of a sudden the
interesting.
coins will go where they're supposed to go.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense for Lightning.
Yeah, it's,
cool.
it's somewhat like, I mean, it's like checking, right? I mean, behind the scenes in the checking business, you can call your bank and they can go figure out what bank put it through, and you can unroll the transaction.
Which takes
Not
hours.
easy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But you can do it,
Yeah.
right?
Cool.
And
to have it be automated is such a pleasure. Yeah.
well, one of the funny things about all of this is to get people to use e-commerce online, we all train them to use their credit cards, and so now they've got this assumption that every transaction they can make a phone call and reverse it, right? It is a tremendous problem. Like the reason that like Vendicia existed was because everybody had to move to subscription because of the underlying economics of the credit card infrastructure. It's not something the outside world kind of sees much, but chargebacks and all the fees that work underneath mean that you can't really sell something for 50 cents.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to, we've seen the kind of rise and maybe the peak of subscription. I'm looking forward to a world where Lightning and other things starts getting to you can give somebody 10 cents and it doesn't,
Exactly.
it's only thought costs.
I'm so excited for that as well. There's this whole project that one of my friends, Jackson, was really working really closely on, and then I was definitely engaged with him on the idea a lot. And just this general notion of being paid per second
Correct.
of time. It's such an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's always you got to think about it, right? And so you have to be careful about making sure things are priced in ways that humans don't, it's too expensive to even think, right?
Yeah.
And
there's the whole transactional economy side of things. Like, I don't want you to have to come into the show and then for you to have to pay us per second or something stupid like that. But at the same time, it makes sense though for maybe the case of that you want to talk to somebody that's really prominent that can help your company out a lot, and you don't know them, you don't have a warm connection to them, and they can maybe open up a couple dollars per second line so that you can call them and talk to them in that sense, get feedback.
Well, and look, there's a kind of other hidden thing here, immutability. We had CryptoKitties, right? But there are other people looking at this and going, I'd love to have 100, 100 Bill of Cats in this world, right? And there will only ever be 100. Well, right now it's kind of hard to charge somebody $1 for that, right? But I can completely see a world where you charge $1 for that. That dollar price works economically, and the chain itself also enforces that only 100 of them will ever exist.
Yeah.
Right, and you can transfer them. Right.
Yeah.
There's a whole kind of all of the virtual economy things that Warcraft and other major games started to play with are now going to be not just virtual, but maybe far beyond the walls of gaming.
Yeah, that's so exciting as well. Okay, so a couple quick questions on the way out. One of them these are a couple that we ask on the show a lot. Gene, do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
I'm worried that the Occam's razor answer is that we are. Right. Now, the interesting question is, do Dyson spheres get created faster than the EM radiation moves out? Right. So that's one interesting way that the math doesn't work on, the conjecture, right? I certainly hope we're not. I'll say it that way. But, right now the evidence does not look pretty.
And do you think that we're in a simulation?
I don't think we're in a simulation. It's hard to explain why. I mean, you're down to philosophy, right? And it's actually, to me, one of the most interesting questions about AI and upload, right? I mean, is there something intrinsic to biology beyond simply chemistry and mathematics that we're not aware of, right? Yeah. I am not a very religious person, but the thing is, how you get that neural net started is an interesting question. It's one of the reasons why upload seems a little safer in the sense of maybe that is how you take a running version, right, and keep it running.
Yeah.
But how do you start it from scratch? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah. I really enjoy the mind is being molded in the womb, and the mind comes out and it starts perceiving an environment, it starts forming all the circuitry in the mind. Yeah, how can that all be how can that be both computationally mapped over time, but then also be potentially simulated in a sense. So.
Well, this is, I kind of agree with Kurzweil in the sense that, like, I think we're going to get to human digital interface depth faster, and then once you do that, you start, melding the best of both, and then I think we might be able to answer that question. The first people who fully upload and fork are going to be very interesting, right?
Yeah. So you just said the word fork, and I do want to.
Sorry.
I want to see your perspective on this. It is something that we talk about on the show quite a bit. And then I got one last question for you, but just. The general Pinker argument about everybody slowly coming up over time is very true economically, but at the same time, we have never seen an exponential technology age like we do today.
That's right.
Do you suspect like a forking in terms of just the sheer amount of genetic engineering and brain uploading and all this different stuff, cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, look, I think you're always going to have the first people who get adopted. Right. Right now in any technology, be it cryptocurrency, the early developers, are wealthy beyond most people's dreams, right? This always happens. Look, Tesla, a bunch of us own Model S's and a whole bunch more people are on Model 3s finally. And that shifts down. Now, it's interesting with that exponentiation, that first uploader has a hell of an advantage. But at the same time, I think it's going to be like the computer revolution of the first upload's probably going to feel like a VIC-20, right? And that's not true. Exactly the most fun thing out there. In fact, look, that's part of the problem with the current infrastructure of the blockchain world. I think we're in the TRS-80 era of blockchains.
You don't suspect. I agree with you, but you suspect that even though that the first initial adopters, that the bottom will still be coming up super quickly over time. That there won't be any sort of a speciation like where we should be pretty good.
We're still an altruistic species, right? There's still that 72-member tribe, and so you at least want the 72-member tribe in, and each 72 wants their 72, right? I mean, I think that is where we go, and you start getting to the question of what's the core cost, and it's probably energy. And again, this is why I sit there going, let's make sure we're not wasting it on other things.
That zettabyte.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, Gene, last question. What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
The most beautiful thing in the world. I don't know, it's probably a selfish answer, but being 50 or 60 miles offshore. I love when, experiencing how huge our actual world already is. People talk about all these things further. I think a lot of folks haven't ventured far enough from land or far enough from civilization in the desert to really get a sense of how big this world already is. I mean, it makes the thought of going to Mars, really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, I love the idea of exploring Earth, exploring other frontiers. That's a good one. So you love 50, 60 miles offshore.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then
it's like over the horizon, right?
Yeah.
It's like you now are truly responsible for everything of your own safety. If you go further, you're now out of helicopter range. It's a different world out there.
Yeah. And that's where death is so close to. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, well, it's you are at Mother Nature's
mercy,
whim, and it's the ultimate test of your technology and your skill, right? Did you correctly make redundant tech? Is it well tested? Do you know what you're doing with it?
Do you know what you're doing with it? It's the same thing in the desert, like
exactly.
you were saying as well.
And I love those too.
Damn. Okay, awesome. This has been such a good episode. Thank you so much for coming on and teaching us. Yeah, better cryptocurrencies. It's been such a pleasure, Gene.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's so much that we can still learn. I think there's, thanks everybody for tuning in. Think about what we talked about. Better cryptocurrencies. How can we figure out these new sort of systems of proof of time, proof of space, also just what is the next advancements in blockchain technology, in cryptocurrency technology? How can we get more people involved in the conversations of starting them? Also, think about how all these applications work in our lives, and let's remember, don't just consume this content, go and create with it. Make blogs, make videos, make companies, go and start cool things with it. Subscribe, comment below with your thoughts. We'd love for you to join the community. Join us on Patreon, help us support this project, help us increase our impact with more people. We'd greatly appreciate that. Thanks, Eddie. Thank you so much for producing and directing our show. Eddie.com, check him out as well. Much love, everyone. Thank you. Peace.
Okay, we are out.
Great.
Awesome.